Jeff Ritter. This is WorldlyXP or Worldly Experiences. For some of you who've never seen this before, we're a new company, a new startup doing internet education for self-directed people who want to learn about new things and careers and potential new jobs and new skills. And we're just beginning a couple weeks. And one of the features we're going to be doing every week for a while, or we're trying to do forever, is going to be interviews with people from all kinds of different careers, talking about those careers. We're also recording these interviews so that we'll be able to have them for people to see in perpetuity, to understand more about all kinds of what skills they need and what kind of jobs exist and what kind of jobs are changing. And it'll be really a service for young people around the world, we hope, is the direction we're going. So thanks for being here. Spread the word for others as much as you can. We'd love that. And I'm very happy to have my old friend Judy Cohen here to talk about a really unusual field. I guess most people don't know anything about it. Mediation, what it is and how important it is really to almost really the everyday world. Almost everybody is touched by it in some way. So here's Judy Cohen from New York City to tell us more about it. How are you doing this morning, Judy?
Good morning, and hi everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you. I thought I'd start and just walk everybody through the resources that I've put up in the chat. And if you'd like to open them up now so you can have them after our session is over, you could do that. We'll be referring to the resources later in the talk. So the first thing you'll see there is a 2-page handout, Tips for Becoming a Mediator, that's full of resources. Next, you have the link to sign up for a listserv, the CUNY Dispute Resolution Consortium listserv, to get updates about mediation. Next, you have the link to the National Association for Community Mediation. That's going to be very important for training and becoming a mediator. I'll talk about that. The Model Standards of Conduct for Mediators. This is the ethical standards that you'll always have in mind constantly when you're mediating. The ADA Mediation Guidelines, which is a project that I led. I'll be referring to that. And finally, Mediation Steps. And that, please open that up, because if you haven't opened it already, it was already on the announcement page for the session, because I'll be walking through the mediation steps with you later.
Great. Yeah, great resources. They'll be here the whole time. You could scroll up in the chat if you can't see them. They're at the very top of the chat. So you just have to scroll up if you can't see them. Very good. Tell us something about what it is. What is mediation, Judy?
Okay, and let me ask a question first, Jeff, just in terms of how we're conducting this. If people have questions, am I right that maybe at the end of each section I talk about, they could ask their questions, or I guess they could put it, if you have a question that you want everybody to know you're the asker, you could put it in the chat to everyone. Or if you have a private question you want it asked, but you don't want to identify yourself, I guess, would they send that to you then, Jeff, in the chat?
Just put it in the chat or send it right to me, yeah.
Okay, great. So the mediation is a process where a neutral person facilitates a conversation between parties in conflict, helping them achieve a mutual understanding and a resolution. And it's often confused with arbitration. So I want to clear this up right away, because in arbitration, you have the neutral hearing evidence and making a decision. But in mediation, the parties are the decision makers. So the real challenge for the mediator is to guide the parties to be able to listen, understand each other, make themselves understood, and come to a resolution that they design. That's in a nutshell what mediation is. And today I'll be talking about the context of workplace, but pretty much everything we talk about today is going to apply to any kind of mediation that you might do.
Go ahead. So how often does this come up in the workplace? Is it something that's pretty common?
Well, conflict comes up constantly in the workplace and everyone else. And one of the things I'd like to really emphasize today, whether people listening decide to become a mediator or not, it can give you skills to handle conflicts in your community, with your children, just about anywhere. So I guess what I'd do, let me start and go through the mediation steps, which are steps you can then apply in your daily life. And just to give you an example, my kids many years ago, I guess they were about 12, were planning birthday party, one of my kids and two of his friends, and they were getting in all kinds of fights. And I used this process to help them resolve it. So what I want to say is the road to becoming a mediator is a long one, but there's so much you can do along the way to apply the skills that you have. So let's look at the handout. If everybody has the one, it starts with mediation steps. And in the mediation, when you're there in the room, in a little while I'll talk about the before and the after, but when you're in the room there, you'll have your people in conflict. Here we're talking workplace, and to make it simple, you'll have an employee across from a supervisor, let's say. The mediator starts out, explains the process and their role in guiding and facilitating the process, and the parties being the decision maker. And the first thing that you'll do is that the parties will say what's on their mind, what's important to them. This could range from the employee saying, my supervisor never says good morning to me, to, and this is a real case I had, an employee or ex-employee who says, my boss fired me when I was diagnosed with cancer because he said it was so depressing to everyone to have me around. So you'll have each, it's really the range of the kind of situations that you encounter. So each party will talk for just a few minutes, saying what's on their mind. And then you have an open discussion where they're asking each other questions, giving examples, providing details. And this part of the mediation could actually go on for several hours. And during that part, the mediator's taking a lot of notes. You know, sometimes people come to mediation and they bring forth one issue, but there's usually a lot of stuff going on. So you take your notes for a few hours, however long it takes, call a break, organize your notes into a list of issues, and you present that to the party, collaborate with them, find out if you've missed anything, if you got anything wrong, and you put that to get that list together into what's going to be your agenda for the next session of mediation. That's problem solving. And what's really critical here is not to jump right into problem solving when you hear what the issues are, not to go right to solutions, because you're going to want to take each issue on your agenda list and discuss it in depth, because you're going to find a lot of stuff come out that you didn't realize, the parties didn't realize. So for each issue, you're going to want to discuss it, list options for each one, brainstorm a lot of different possibilities, discuss each possibility, and wait till the very end to start going over what are your resolutions going to be. And then to plan your follow-up. The follow-up's really important because one thing we find in mediation is you can have people in conflict, the same conflict for years. They might have different value systems, different work styles, all kinds of differences and different kinds of habits. So even though you might reach a resolution, it might break down, things might go wrong. You need a plan in place for how to follow up with your mediation. And then the last step is to write your agreement. Normally you do reach an agreement and you put that in writing in the parties' words, they sign it, and that's the end of your in-person mediation session.
So there's a lot of process, and you go through a lot of training to get learn that process. What are the skill sets? What did you bring to it before you even started doing this that was made you a good person to do this?
Well, I think to be a mediator, first you need a certain kind of personality. You have to enjoy people. You have to be a problem solver, but to sit back and help other people solve their problems, not to have all the answers yourself. You have to be patient. You have to be a good listener. Those are sort of the personality traits, I'd say. I think also cognitively, the way you think, you need to be really analytical, because while people are talking, you're thinking on all kinds of levels. You have to think about a lot of different stuff at once while you're taking notes, planning, preparing, making judgments. And I think also that to be a mediator, you really need life experience. I'll say to be a workplace mediator. Now, certainly, even in the schools, they have peer mediators in high schools. That's a beautiful kind of mediation. But speaking here about workplace, you need life experience. You need to know the workplace. You need to have a certain kind of wisdom, I'd say. And you need this kind of balance of being sort of authoritative in a sense, so that people know you're in charge and they trust you, while you still have to be gentle and persuasive. And just to give you an example, many times when I do organizational mediations, I'll show up and you'll have the boss sitting behind the desk where he thinks we're going to conduct the mediation with him behind the desk, and then the employee sitting on the other side. And that's not going to happen. So you have to, as a mediator, go in. You can't be bossy about it, but you need to get him out from behind the desk in a kind of way. I think you also have to be a creative thinker. For example, I had a mediation where the parties were sitting down and the supervisor says to the employee, "Change places with me, the sun is in my eyes." So what do you do as the mediator? How do you handle that? You have to think fast, because if you let that one go, you're sunk from the get-go. So.
In your eyes instead of his eyes.
Well, actually what I did is I said, let's move the table in that case. So that's how we handled that. But I want to emphasize, even though I've said you need a certain life experience and wisdom, that young people can start this. You can start this at any age, get your training, practice, and do the kind of things that I'll talk about in a little while to become a mediator, because you want to practice with these kind of judgment calls on a low level before you get to the bigger stuff. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. I did a mediation where, well, one thing I didn't mention in the process is sometimes you'll divide, you want to have the people together as much as possible because they're resolving their problem. But sometimes you'll divide them up and you'll meet privately with each party. So in one situation, I went to divide the parties, and the employee said, "I'll just leave my bag here. It's got all my guns in it." So how do I handle that? I have to make a judgment. And again, with some experience, okay, so what I did in that case was I said, okay, go ahead. We'll keep your bag here. I called security. I closed the mediation. That's it, because you don't joke about that. I had another case, and don't worry, this doesn't happen often, but I had parties physically at each other's throats. I mean, I had to really divide them, hold one back, walk the other one out the door. And when I got home, the police called me because one of them had filed a complaint, and they asked me what happened. So, Jeff, we didn't talk about this yet, and I'll get back to this one. I'll get back to the before and after when we finish this section. But the parties and the mediator signed a confidentiality agreement. So what I had to tell the police was that process is confidential. I can't tell you anything. So judgment calls like this, you have to make constantly. And as a young person getting into mediation, you start with the easy stuff and gradually you get to the higher level kind of stuff. And you want, by showing you can make these decisions, to have people trust you that you're going to run this process, keep them feeling safe, and hand some power over to you. And I don't know if people have questions yet, Jeff, if you want to take them, or if I should go back to the before and after.
Go back to the before and after. That would be good. Yeah.
Okay.
Take questions anytime.
Oh, okay, fine. And I sort of had the idea that I would keep checking the chat, but that's not going to happen. That's too distracting. I see there's 17 new messages. Okay, so we talked about the mediation process where you're in the in-person session. But what happens before the session? So here, if you look at your handout with the mediation steps, right below that, I'm not going to go through this handout, but I'd like you all to look at it later. This is mediation convening. And one thing I found early on in mediating is that people come to the table and they are not ready to have this discussion. So in my private mediations where the parties contact me, I'm not going out to some organization, I always spend an hour privately with each party, preparing them to participate effectively. And that's also an opportunity to develop rapport with them. So that's part of the before in terms of process. Now, in terms of after for process, the other thing I do for my private mediations, which you cannot do in an organizational one, if an organization brings you in, is that we have in our contract an agreement that if the mediation is successful, I will meet with them again in 2 to 3 weeks, and we will go over anything that might have fallen through the cracks, even where parties leave the mediation session and they feel really good and they might even be hugging each other. They have a well-crafted agreement. Sometimes something might come up they didn't consider, or they might try something out that was in their agreement and it doesn't work. So that meeting again afterwards is really critical for me for the durability of the process. So that's sort of the process I talked about, but let me just say a few words about logistics and sort of the business end of it. It's really important to have that mediation set up so that the logistics are workable. And just to give you a recent example, and this was nobody's fault, everybody thought somebody else would take care of it, but I had a mediation by telephone and the employee was in her truck, not in a private meeting room. And so it was very noisy, and that's the kind of thing that you need to set up ahead of time. And again, I had to make a judgment call that comes with the more experience you have, you feel confident. I felt confident to say to the supervisor, let's take a few minutes, this is worth it. Please find a room for this person to sit in. And the supervisor actually said she couldn't. And I said, take your time, we'll just sit and wait. And she did find the room. Mm-hmm. You also have paperwork. And what I love about the organizational ones is they take care of a lot of the paperwork. But when you're on your own, you have a lot more. But certainly for every mediation, you do have what we call the agreement to mediate. And this includes the confidentiality agreement. I'm not going to get into that too much now because we're not talking about the nitty gritty, just doing an overview, but the confidentiality is very important. And finally, if it's a private mediation, you need your contract. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the before and after.
Good, good. Let's say, this inspires a young person who says, there's something I like about this. This has some attractiveness to me. Maybe they haven't been to college yet, or they have a couple of years of college. They haven't even chosen a major necessarily. Is there some pathway you would recommend for this? What are the first steps you would take in terms of education or training?
Well, I think I recommend for the basic training the way many of us got our start, which is to go to a community mediation center. They're based in the state courts. And we'll get into details on that in a little while. But in your community mediation program, you get 30 hours or 35 hours of training. I'm sorry, and let me just backtrack and say what community mediation is. This is where you'll mediate neighbor-to-neighbor disputes, or maybe a customer and a store owner. Could be family disputes, just these kind of disputes you find, or conflicts you find in the neighborhood. So
are these places everywhere? They have these everywhere? I've never seen one.
They're based in the state court programs across the country, and everyone, this is where you look at the link I've given you for NAFCM, the National Association for Community Mediation, and that can lead you to where is your state court program that will house the Community Mediation Center.
So it's a government-funded place.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And they may actually, some of them have a nonprofit component as well. So in that training, you'll get your 1 week or whatever of training, and then a follow-up. For example, in my program, I was able, after my training, to mediate pro bono for a year. I went in one morning a week to the court, to the Community Mediation Center, starting out observing, then co-mediating, then being observed, and then just being a regular mediator there. And with this, you get a range of experience that's just unbelievable. And it's so gratifying because you're really there with people in the community.
Mm.
And just some other elements to point out, a lot of them, these programs also have, which I did, small claims court mediation programs, which are very challenging and fun, civil court, and they may have other kind of programs that you could participate in. And I just want to share my favorite community mediation that I did. This involved two neighbors that were at odds. One was Spanish speaking, one was deaf. And so we had a sign language interpreter and a Spanish language interpreter. And it was so wonderful, the kind of communication that we developed. It was really a wonderful process. And I could say more about, if you like, Jeff, more about what people could do to break into mediation.
Well, your being bilingual really helped in that situation, I guess. Bilingual.
Yeah, it does. And well, the other thing you sometimes see is that the translation is not always correct. And then again, you have to feel confident to take a break, meet with the interpreter, the translator, and talk about it. Because I have had situations where the translators, they get excited about the case too. They have their opinions, but that is not their role.
And I had times when I've met bilingual students, you know, who grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, and they were perfectly fluent in English, and they didn't know that there were careers related to that skill. This would be a great one for them to know about.
Oh, that's true. Well, being a I'm sorry, let me start again. Being a translator in the court system is a great job. And again, you really feel like you're doing something for people in the community. And of course, it's an interesting job as well.
Do you need a college degree to go to one of those community centers, and take the training? Do you need to have a college degree?
I don't think so. I wouldn't think that you would have to do that. I do know that they're very popular now. And so they're hard to get into. And some of them even charge, which in my day, they were just happy to get anyone. I don't believe that you need a degree.
But as a part of it was really a part of the legal system. The federal government must have started it, I guess, at some point. How long ago did it start?
That I don't know, but we do have someone, Maria Volpe, that you want to hold that question for her later, or maybe she'll.
If she could type it in over.
Maria, if you're there, let me introduce Maria, by the way, at this point, since you've asked that question. Maria is a professor of sociology at John Jay College, a world leader in mediation. And I'm going to talk about mentoring in a little while. Maria has never been my formal mentor, but I have to say she's so collaborative that when you work with her, you're just always learning. And maybe we could ask Maria now to even talk about the handouts, the resources that we have up there. And she could answer the question about the court mediation programs. Is she on though? I know she was planning to.
I think her, she's here. She might not be in front of the computer right this second.
Okay, so you know what? Let me continue and talk more about training because I do not know, and you can hold that question. So there's also.
Yeah,
she's here, she's just muted.
Oh, you unmute her? Oh, Maria, thank you.
Hi. So, great to be here. I just wanted to go back a minute to the CDRCs, the Community Dispute Resolution Centers. In New York State, there are centers that service all of the counties in New York State. These are non-for-profit organizations that get some of their funding from the unified court system. They don't get all of their funding, so they are not government organizations, to go back to your question, Jeff.
Okay.
They provide services to the community with funding from the unified court system, but are not government entities. And they vary around the country. For the most part, they are non-for-profits. They are grassroots, community-based organizations that have local residents who are trained as mediators resolve conflicts.
But it sounds like something that started from a movement in the 60s or something like that.
Yeah, you're right.
You did?
There are those who in the late 60s, early 70s were trying to find ways to bring justice closer to the people, trying to find better ways And the other part of that is not just better, but cheaper ways of dealing with potentially legalistic matters, and created these centers. What's been interesting is that over the years, what snowballed is the creation of cheaper ways of dealing with conflict. So people have gone into private practice. There have been all kinds of firms developed around the country. People are trying to make a living doing mediation that was once a real grassroots effort.
Yeah, that's great.
At least that's the contemporary version of mediation. Mediation as a process, honestly, has been around since the beginning of humankind. There's always been someone who's in the middle trying to help people to resolve their differences. But the contemporary version of trying to popularize it, institutionalize it, make it readily available has its roots in the very late 60s, early 70s, and we now have mediation courses in virtually every law school, undergraduate schools and communities. So, yeah.
Nobody's ever tried to shut it down and say, this is too progressive, takes away money from lawyers, or nobody's ever said this, we have to get rid of this.
I think we're beyond that right now. In New York State, since last year, the chief judge has announced a new initiative called presumptive ADR, presumptive appropriate dispute resolution. And virtually every civil case is now directed towards one of the alternative ways of resolving conflicts before they continue on with the traditional litigation.
All right, that's great.
Maria, I put up links to information about the breakfast and the listserv. Could you just talk for a few minutes, since you're in the spotlight now, about the resources at the CUNY DRC?
Sure. So after 9/11, many conflict resolvers were eager to figure out how to respond to the tragedy in New York. And to make a long story short, I decided to call a breakfast to discuss what responses might be possible for conflict resolvers, and we all came together. And since then, we've been holding monthly breakfasts. They're on the first Thursday of every month. They start at 8:30. Up until April, they were in person. Since April, they've been online, and I see Alex Yaroslavsky on this call. He was our first virtual presenter in April.
Hello.
Hi, Alex.
Hi.
And since April, we've been doing these virtually. Next month will be number 230. We've already had 229 breakfasts. The October breakfast will be number 230. Parallel effort was trying to find a way to communicate virtually. And we decided that perhaps it might make sense to set up a listserv. So in addition to the breakfast, I created this listserv, the NYC-DR listserv, and Judy has put the link to sign up for it. And virtually every issue of interest to conflict resolvers is posted. Jobs, events, conferences, trainings. So if you want to stay abreast of what's going on, sign up for the listserv. There are over 3,700 on the list, and in over 25 countries. So you'll be part of a vast network of conflict resolvers.
Okay, great. Wow. Good to hear about it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Maria. Thank you.
Go ahead, Judy.
Oh, okay. So I'll continue talking about breaking into the field as a young person, the kind of training to get. So obviously, subscribing to the listserv, you're going to hear about trainings and activities, attending the breakfast. It's a wonderful resource. I've talked about the basic training. You'll continue getting more and more of the generic basic training, but you also get specialized training if there's a field that you're interested in. So whether it's family mediation, elder mediation, securities,
Okay.
Specialized training. My area of specialization is disability-related issues. And I'll give another example from the community mediation setting where I had a case involving a person who was blind, who was bringing a guide dog, and a taxi driver, the taxi who had refused to pick him up because he was Muslim and he said he could not have a dog in the car. So I'm not going to talk about the case, it did resolve, but just to say, to set up the room, I spoke to the person who was blind, asked where he'd like the dog to sit, so we removed the chair. I gave him a tour of the room so he could walk around the room, touching everything to orient himself. We did introductions in a way going around so he could hear everyone's voice. And so these are the kinds of things, if you have an area of specialization, that you can bring something special to the table.
That's interesting.
Now, you're going to want to also find mentors if you can. I was very lucky and brazen, and I approached the late, great Margaret Shaw, mediator, and asked her if I could accompany her to mediations. And if any of you see when you're in your training or you hear about mediators that you think would be good, just approach them. Ask Maria, or maybe she'll suggest someone. But she doesn't have time to mentor you, but she will have ideas for you. Observe mediations as much as you can and develop peer relationships, even with other people in your training sessions. We started, this was in the early 90s when women mediators was like a new hot thing. Of course, now it's just every day, but we started a support group for women mediators that we met once a month and shared ideas. And you do not have to be above going into, excusing yourself and going into the ladies' room or men's room and sending, calling up a friend, oh, I don't know what to do now. So you develop these relationships with people who can really assist you, support you, people you can learn from. You'll also want to find opportunities to practice pro bono. And this could be in programs that already have something existing, or it could be in an organization you have a relationship with. Maybe there's, I don't know, a nursing home, a community center, that you could volunteer to help them if they have disputes between, staff or clients or whatever. As much practice as you can get, particularly if you get the coaching and the feedback. Conferences, and in Maria's handout, tips for becoming a mediator, you'll see a list of the major mediation organizations, Association for Conflict Resolution, the ADR section. There is a local, well, now everybody on this call is from all over the place, but most likely you have local organizations that will have conferences, meetings, get active in the field, join committees. And so really the way to become a mediator is to do it, meet people, get training, practice, I would say.
We call it job shadowing. A lot of times too, young people want to do a job shadow, and most people are open to it. If they're approached by a young person who's interested, they're thrilled. They like the attention as well, and helping somebody out is what most people like to do. Well, great. Let's ask for anybody who has some questions to add them to the chat right now, so we can take some specific questions from people as well.
Should I add one more thing, Jeff, if you're about to open it up? That's the kinds of work that you can get, how you work as a mediator. And there's 3 different ways you could do that. Is this a good time for me to go into that?
Sure.
Okay. One is to get a job mediating internally. So an organization, a corporation, a public agency hires you to be their mediator or to run their mediation program. I did this at the Federal Aviation Administration, where I ran a mediation program. I had 20 mediators. I trained them. They did the mediations. I also did mediation. And what I did with my program was that all of my internal mediators, we had what we call collateral duty mediators. That means they could be work in HR, they could be accountants, in a range of jobs. And then on the side, technology, on the side, they would be mediators. So I arranged for all of them, every mediation they did, they co-mediated with one of my colleagues who's a professional mediator in New York City. So that's working internally, getting hired full-time. is the first way. The second way is, and this is the most common, I suppose, to just go be a freelance mediator. As a freelance mediator, one of the things you're going to do is try to get on what we call rosters. There are rosters for federal agencies, for example, the Postal Service or TSA. You apply for the roster. If you're lucky, you get on, and then they'll call you once a month or twice a month, and you'll get cases that way. I would say right now, there's still my generation. I mean, with the Postal Service, the same people that became mediators in the early 90s with me, we've all still filled that roster. So there's not a lot of openings, but by the time any young people here get to that point, there may well be. There are also mediation providers that have rosters, like the American Arbitration Association, for example, has a mediation roster. And if you're an attorney, the federal courts also have mediation rosters. So those are some of the kinds of rosters to get on. And on the handout, the tips handout from the CUNY DRC above, you'll see some other ideas. Then, of course, you get your private cases. How do you do that? You do a lot of promotion, the kind of marketing I talked about before, the networking, developing relationships. You need a website, publish, you know, even if you're a new mediator, if you have an idea or an area of specialization, you can publish articles. Mediate.com, which you'll see again in that tips handout, accepts a range of articles. And by the way, that's a good place to look and do a lot of reading about mediation. And present at conferences. So that's the second way to go freelance. And the third thing I want to mention is, even if you don't become a mediator, having mediator skills you can use in just about any job or career that you find. Even if it's an unskilled kind of work, you still are going to find conflicts between coworkers, all kinds of things going on in your family, in your community. But plus, I would say at this point, conflict competency or these kind of conflict resolution or conflict management skills are very highly valued in the workplace today, in the marketplace. And if you can show that you've taken training or done some mediation and put it on your resume, I think it would go very far to making you more marketable and giving you the opportunity to use all these kind of skills outside of a formal mediator setting.
Yeah, certainly. Does a lawyer ever say, I'd rather have this case go to a mediator than handle it myself?
You know, lawyers have different kinds of approaches and opinions, but I do believe that a lot of attorneys are very interested in mediation, and they certainly do participate frequently in mediation.
And unions have unions automatically do this? Unions have this built into their structure?
I believe most unions really have mediation pretty much mostly on the level of contract negotiations, would go to mediators. With the unions, I would say the union representatives, the business agents, the field reps, whatever the union calls them, pretty much are out there doing the negotiating if there's a grievance. But you will find some, for example, the Postal Service, where you will have the unions participating in mediation. And I have to say, because a lot of mediators feel uncomfortable having those kind of advocates in the room, attorneys or union reps, I think worked with in a collaborative way, these kind of representatives can be so useful to the mediation process. They really understand negotiating and collaborating, so I find them very, very useful. Jeff, I want to add one more thing about breaking in, if I might, that I think could be helpful. If you do try to set out on a career of mediation, it is really helpful to have some kind of sideline. For me, that was training. I did a lot of work as a trainer, conflict management training, mediator training, ADA mediator training, disability awareness training. You might do coaching. And also to be open to different kinds of mediations. So I had a genre, I want to say, I'm not thinking of the right word, a kind of mediation fall in my lap that I ended up loving so much, and I was never looking for it. and that is small business partnership mediation. I started getting all these young women that were best friends in college, started a business together with no idea, no real vision, no idea how to define their roles, and ended up in a lot of conflict. And these were, so these are some ways, and plus having a niche field of practice for me, the disability area. And for any of you out there, if you have something you know about art or working with elders or whatever it may be, that could be an area to expand into.
Okay. Very interesting stuff. Again, we have time for questions. If you want to add a question to the chat, feel free. And obviously, mediation is an integral part of a complex society. Is it around the world? I mean, is it coming up big in developing countries? You know anything about that? It must be.
Oh, I'm going to throw this question to Maria.
Yeah. Must be a part of the world. Oh, yeah, if she wants to come back in, she could do that. Also, do you ever look at world conflicts? I mean, that are going on. Say, if only I could get in there, I could mediate that, them out of that jam. You know, the Israeli-Arab-Palestinian situation and things like that. Well, if only I could get there, I could get them to agree. Do you think you ever feel like that about things you see around the world?
Maria.
Yeah.
Yes, mediation is global. As I said earlier, mediation is really a process that has been around since the beginning of humankind. It's done in different ways in different cultures. In some cultures, the elders are the dominant mediators. In others, it's the faith-based leaders. In some communities, it could be the business people or the local people who have some influence. Or in the international community, we often defer to the political leaders, government leaders, and their designees to spearhead many of those efforts. I think any one of us would love to just say, I could bring together, major warring factions, but what credibility, what gravitas do we have to enter that scene? I mean, earlier Judy laid out a number of qualities that mediators have or bring to the scene. And, while someone may think that they can go to the Middle East and try to, bring together the parties, but.
Yeah, like Jared Kushner. How did they think? Jared Kushner, oh, he'll take care of it. Who trusts him? Yeah. Is trust really the main word behind mediation?
Trust is a very big one. In Jared's case, he has a connection to a political leader. If one of us who has, thousands of hours of training and experience wanted to do it, chances are no one would listen to us, right? I mean, why would they? On the other hand, the same person going into a local community, if they're known, would be, the perfect person to mediate. So a lot of this is very contextual. It depends on who the parties are. It's very subjective.
And trust is very different culturally around the world, I assume.
It is. I mean, in some cases, it has to be a male. It's gender-based. In some instances, it has to be an elder. We defer to, those who've been around. So
Here might say, I don't trust that person wearing that kind of glasses, or those shoes make me, I don't trust them because of that. There's something that doesn't.
Or they remind me of my second grade teacher who I hated, right? Or whatever,
There's going to be obstacles for people to trust a mediator. How do you overcome an obstacle that's personal or very ingrained in somebody?
Well, you have to be very careful about your own reputation. So it's something that you're constantly working on, because one bad move could really destroy your reputation, right? But also, technique-wise, mediators often meet with the parties before they bring them together to build trust with them individually, because for the most part, these individuals no longer have trust for each other. So how are they ever going to trust someone who they don't know? So it's helpful for mediators to often meet with the parties beforehand to start the process, to get to meet them, to build trust that way.
Now,
And I
this
think
is a
also,
growing field. Is this growing substantially?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
One of the challenges is that the number of compensated opportunities is still relatively slim, and that has been one of the major barriers. As I said before, the process gained a reputation of being better and cheaper, and for some, less expensive meant free, because many of those, as Judy mentioned, who got started were doing volunteer work in the communities, and then many of the courts were also using mediators as volunteers, and because people wanted to get experience, whatever, they decided that this was one way to get experience. I'll do it for free, hoping that they would then be compensated. And some of that hasn't changed as quickly as it should have. So there's a lot of uncompensated work in this field.
Okay. But there are opportunities, but you have to, it's going to be different in different communities.
Well, the other thing, and for those who are on the listserv who are on this call know, I often post job postings. And what's really fascinating is that these are the kinds of skills that can be used with virtually any job. So one has to be really creative in how one thinks about using these skills. The chances of finding a job as a mediator are usually pretty slim.
Mhm.
However, the opportunity to use the skills of a mediator are the sky's the limit. You can use them anywhere. And the burden is on you usually to convince an employer that these are really useful skills. But for the jobs that I've been posting on the listserv, could be virtually anything that's asking for negotiation skills, critical thinking, good listening, problem solving, the kinds of skills that mediators use all the time. And I've had many people say to me, gee, I would never have thought of all these jobs if you hadn't posted, jobs in real estate, finance, business, in the schools, etc.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at for our organization is people who are career changers because of AI. AI comes in and takes your job. This sounds like something that AI will probably never take. Do you think that's true?
I think that there probably are some parts of this work that could lend themselves, particularly if you're working with all kinds of, I don't know, numbers that you're trying to crunch to come up with an agreement. So you turn it over to, those who, can crunch them in a different kind of way for you.
It might be AI assisted, but still, in the end, it's going to be a human making most of this.
I'm not so sure that I would say that
Another
some
one.
sort of robotic entry is not going to play a role. That I think that's already here. I mean, there are those who are working on those kinds of systems that would plug in the various positions that people have, their various options, and out comes some outcome.
Uh-huh. All right.
And the parties might even trust that more than you, because here's this so-called impartial entity that's going to, maybe we're talking about going into the future here, but some impartial entity that can make some sense out of what's going on, right? Without being subjective, without worrying about the emotions, without worrying about all of the highs and lows that go into any conflict situation.
Well, maybe we'll look at, in terms of for young people opportunities, we'll say maybe they'd be a part of those those systems and developing them might be one way to go. Would be work with computer people to help create systems that are trusted and autonomous in some ways.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Thank you so much. All right, Judy, you have a couple of closing comments or last couple of things you want to comment on or emphasize?
I would just repeat what I said before and Maria has said, which is that being a mediator is very gratifying. Even if you don't find a job in the field per se, you can use it in your daily life and find ways to put it into practice that can be very fulfilling and life enriching.
One question certainly people are going to ask and want to know would be, what kind of living or what kind of what kind of living are you could you make at this? What's the pay scale look like for mediation? I mean, you get paid per job, you get paid by the hour, what kind of structure?
If you mediate organizationally, they will either pay per the mediation, which could be something like $500. My quickest one was a half hour where the employee said his piece and the supervisor said, "Oh, I didn't understand before." And the employee said, "I just wanted you to hear that. Goodbye." So it could be from a half hour or it could really last 10 hours. Normally they're about 4 or so for workplace, the organizational ones. They might be by the hour, the organizational ones, and that could be like maybe $125 an hour. Mediating privately is more like $300 an hour.
Oh, okay. And those would be private mediation. I mean, do people do this for divorce courts instead of divorce courts and lawyers and things like that?
Well, family mediators, and I'll just say a word, and if there are any family mediators here, you could add to it, but family mediators mediate privately. People go to them and pay them. It's a highly specialized field. Not everybody could do it. I don't know it myself. And many of the courts do have a family mediation component. Is there anyone there, or even Maria, if there's no one else who would say something about family mediation?
Custody things as well as divorce settlement.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And there's not laws which regulate that as much as the people coming to agreements.
People come to an agreement, right? Mm-hmm.
How much legal background do you think you really need to do this? Does it relate to a lot of laws?
As far as legal background, it depends what kind of mediation you're doing. Now, for workplace mediation, you need to know some EEO law. You need to understand collective bargaining if it's a unionized workplace, and you need to understand how what is discipline and discharge, all that sort of thing. If it's securities, you need to understand that. It depends on the context of the mediation, whether or not you need to know the law.
2 areas you mentioned, just out of curiosity. What's the biggest conflict that you had to resolve in the FAA? What things did they have between the air controllers and things like that?
Let me see. I have to say in the FAA, there were really just your typical workplace disputes as I described. But when I first came in, there was a dispute involving an air traffic controller, a female, who the people were writing graffiti about her in the restroom. I mean, that you do get in the workplace cases of harassment, and these are very tricky and very difficult to resolve. And one thing to understand and to help your parties understand is that in a mediation session, you might not get people to be able to like or respect each other, but you can help people change their behaviors. So at the end of a mediation, people still might dislike each other or disrespect each other, but they will have written down some parameters for how they're going to conduct themselves.
Okay. And how about the post office? What were the biggest conflicts there?
Well, I'm not going to identify a specific case of a place like that. The FAA one was general, but I'm not going there.
Well, they're too specific.
But I want to say they're typical. I mean, all these places, you really feel like you see the same case over and over, where I end up a lot of times, and speaking of trust, which I wanted to mention, in mediation, a place to build the parties' trust is in the private caucuses. And that's where you can show them. maybe not in front of the other party, that you understand what their feeling is, right? And this is where you sort of help them understand, look, welcome to the world of work. It's often unfair. You're often going to have mean supervisors. What can we do to help you be able to survive and to feel comfortable in your workplace? So you do a lot of strategizing with the parties in private caucus so that they can leave that mediation, not just with an agreement about everybody's behaviors, but with some skills you've given them so that they can go on and do for themselves what they weren't able to do before they entered that mediation.
They almost always have to give up something when they're trying to get something and say, okay, if you really want that to happen, you have to give up this thing that you've always done or this habit you have.
That's such a great question, because technically, yes, you do have to do that. The agreement, even though it's the employee typically that has brought the complaint, you want the agreement to show some kind of balance. But frequently, that takes a lot of creativity, because frequently it really is one party that has, I'm going to say, caused the issue or caused the conflict, and not the other one. So it takes some creativity to build in something where you feel there's a reciprocity, because you want the people leaving that day feeling like they're partners on some level.
And they walk away feeling good. I didn't give up that much. And maybe later they go like, I actually did, but okay, it's okay.
Yeah, they go home and call their cousin, and then they're like, oh, why did I agree to that? So what you really want to do by the end of the mediation is go through all these variations of what can happen. You want both parties feeling as good as they can when they leave, about each other and about their agreement, because little things will break down and they will have second thoughts. So you want to, and that's why in the initial part where you have your open discussion, you want to uncover everything, because you don't want them leaving and being like, oh, I forgot about this.
Well, Judy, I can't imagine a better mediator than you. You make everybody feel at home. You're very good at making people feel heard. You're listening. You listen so well, and you always seem cheerful. Even you may not always be inside, but you always seem cheerful. And I imagine you're one of the best in the business.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. This has been a pleasure, everyone.
I really appreciate you being here. I hope that I'm sure people are going to get a lot out of hearing a lot of things you've said today, and it's an exposure to something most people don't know about. I really hope young people find out about this, who have other kinds of skills and interests and areas where they can say this goes together with something I already do, whether it's bilingual or certain specialized knowledge, and they can say this is a career I never thought of. My parents never even heard of it, and most people who work somewhere have heard of it at least a little bit, but they never thought I could do this. I never thought I could do this. And now they've got a nice path at looking at this. And we will look at the way of connecting career changers to this too. I think though the AI may be on its way, it's going to take some time. But career changers who are looking for a new thing to do, but have that life experience, especially in organizations, this may be perfect for a lot of people, and they may not know about it either. And we're definitely going to be going in that direction and helping out those people too. So thanks everybody for participating and being here, and do let other people know about WorldlyXP, where we have interviews with different career people from all over, or I hope we're going to have all over the world eventually, but we got a lot of eclectic things like this coming up as well. So let other people know about it. We really appreciate your participation and letting others know about us. So thank you so much, Judy. Everybody else, have a great afternoon, evening. It's afternoon for most of us, and thank you very much.